This video is sponsored by World Anvil. I recently made a video where I talked about how I started a new campaign with the players meeting in a tavern. It's a fun part of the tradition of D&D. The iconic campaign always opens in a tavern. And I wanted to give my players the iconic D&D experience because they were new to the game. So I started the game in a tavern. And it sort of didn't work. I mean, don't get me wrong, the session overall went well and the players had fun, but the way I opened the game with the specific way these player characters met in this tavern ultimately failed to get the game off on the right foot. And in fact, I actually think it hurt the game's introduction and left me having to do a lot more work to hook the players into the adventure itself. So what did I do wrong? What are the benefits to starting your game in a tavern, and what are the pitfalls? And how can you avoid making my mistake the next time you start your campaign? I wanted to make sure to cover this topic right here at the beginning of the year because I know a lot of people are probably starting new campaigns this year, and I want to help you get your games going more successfully than I did. But also, I just started a new video series all about the many ways to structure your campaign, and so I wanted to cover the most iconic campaign intro right here near the beginning of the series. If you haven't watched those other videos yet, make sure to check out the playlist, it's in the description below. Now on with the show. First, let's talk about the reasons why you should start your game in a tavern, and then we'll talk about the problems with starting in a tavern. But why do this? How does starting in a tavern improve your campaign? Well, first of all, taverns just genuinely make for good meeting places within the world of the game. You can pretty much expect to find anyone from town chilling in the tavern at some point during the day. People come there for drinks, they come there to get their meals, and they come there to gossip. So it is legitimately just a really good place to put a bunch of local NPCs who can answer questions and offer plot hooks. It's a great place to learn about rumors, and some of the people in the tavern might even be looking to hire somebody to help out with an odd job, the kind of thing that could potentially lead to a full D&D adventure. Plus, this is very likely where new people will stay in town for the night, at an inn attached to the tavern. So it's a super convenient place to drop new players into the campaign because it just logically makes sense that they would be in the tavern because they're new to town and they need a place to sleep. Whether they're having a meal, having a drink, asking about rumors, or looking for work, the tavern has what they need. Speaking of looking for work, in my recent video about creating my new starting town, I discussed how I really wanted to open the game in a tavern so I could show my players my job board, complete with a physical prop where individual flyers were tacked onto a corkboard. And there are other ways to introduce job offers in a tavern as well. For example, the shadowy figure lurking in a corner booth who has a job for you, that can also work really well. Additionally, starting with the players in a tavern is a classic trope of D&D. And while we can and should examine old tropes and make sure we're thinking them through and executing them well, and more on that in a minute, there is a huge part of me that loves the idea of introducing new players to the classic tropes and traditions of the game. The first time I sat down to play ever, our GM described how we were in a tavern, and one of the other players said, "Oh man, you're doing the cliche, you all start in a tavern?" I know that sounds rude, but these were players who already knew each other and had played together before, and so they'd already experienced all the tropes and they were ready for a more inventive introduction. And if you still think it sounds rude even with that context, yeah, maybe, but we were all in college. It's possible we just weren't the best at phrasing everything in polite ways yet. Something we're all great at now as adults, I'm sure. But when I heard someone call starting in a tavern a cliche, I started to get a little excited to find out that I was getting the classic D&D experience. I don't really care if something is cliche as long as it's executed well, which might explain why my favorite Critical Role campaign is Campaign 1 of Vox Machina, and why my favorite franchise is the MCU. Cliches don't really bother me. And so I like to give my players what I think of as the quintessential D&D experience. And part of that means not running from the old tropes, but embracing them. Besides, new players don't even know that starting in a tavern is a cliche. And for that matter, cliches become cliches for a reason, because they work. Except, do they work? As you can tell from the story I opened with, clearly this trope is not completely foolproof. The biggest problem I faced in my game was that I didn't give them anything to interact with. Now, I thought I had actually solved this problem. I had filled the tavern with things to do, but none of them were connected to the characters in any way. I'd stocked the tavern with some colorful characters and some activities. There was a fortune teller sitting at a table, there was a corner of the tavern where you could play darts or play pool, and there was a waitress, the daughter of the bartender and the cook, and she spoke with a lisp, so when one player told me that he wanted to order food, the waitress walked up to him and said, "Our specials today are spiced potatoes, fried asparagus, and rattlesnake stew." And that worked exactly as I intended. The player responded to her by mimicking her lisp because I think new players just often can't help themselves when someone does a funny voice or has some sort of speech impediment, especially a lisp. I don't know why, but for some reason, they'll just often mimic it back to them. I don't know if they just can't help themselves or if they're just getting used to the fact that their actions have consequences, which was actually the point. The waitress, who, remember, was just a teenage girl, stormed off, clearly upset, and as she left, she sort of told her father, "I told you that people were going to notice and make fun of me." And her father glared at the player. And I made it very clear that bartender was going to spit in that player's next drink. And that can be a little lesson to the new player that, yeah, actually the things that you do in the game are going to have consequences. I think that's a valuable lesson to teach new players, and a fun little scene to present it in. But I sort of tricked myself into thinking that because I'd prepared one little role-playing moment to basically con my player into doing something mean and facing consequences for it, that I'd somehow prepared enough for my entire party. But that definitely was not the case. One player interacted with the waitress, but even once that scene was done, all he could do was just eat his food and maybe drink his drink. Nothing else to interact with there. Two other players just drank alone, one at the bar and one at the table. And one player played darts, and I don't even remember what the fifth player did because, well, first of all, I don't take good notes during my games, but also, it ultimately didn't matter. Now, I had the fortune teller, and so when no one interacted with her, I had her take the initiative and approach the wizard. But his character was a veteran who wanted to drink alone, and so he just declined her offer for a reading and continued to ignore her. However, the moment the farmer staggered in and said, "They got my girl," basically representing the plot hook, the inciting incident, inviting them all to adventure, the wizard immediately said, "I bet it was the rebels." And that's when I realized I'd fucked up. Because if I talked to him in advance about what he was doing in town and what he wanted to react to, I might have been able to do something interesting with the idea that he had rebels that he fought against and he was still looking out for them. Maybe I could have had some people in the tavern who were talking suspiciously, and they look over at him and they recognize him as a veteran, and they quickly hide some papers and scurry away. Ooh, what's that? Is there some sort of insurrection brewing in town? I don't know. And I'll never know because I didn't talk to him in advance. Now, not every player is going to be able to tell you in advance that they're going to respond any certain way. We think about the game very differently when we're expecting to play versus when we're actually playing, and that is even more true for players who have never actually played the game before. But it is still possible that he already knew his character was going to be keeping an eye out for rebels that he fought against in a war. The point is, I don't know, because I didn't put anything in this tavern that was deliberately designed to get a reaction from any of these specific characters. My plan was for the big dramatic moment to come when the farmer bursts in and says, "They got my girl." I wanted to set the scene so that scene could be shaken up by the inciting incident. But when that happened, two of my players didn't even take the plot hook. They just ignored the guy covered in blood who had staggered into the room. Now, that's a pretty unrealistic thing to do. If a bloody man enters a room, any room, you're going to have some sort of reaction no matter who you are. But once again, I forgot. New players. We can't automatically expect that they're going to learn to think as their characters. They're looking for things that are meant to engage them. And because I'd set the scene without giving them much to interact with, they were probably feeling pretty passive at this point. And besides, we have to remember that a lot of new players enjoy playing the sullen loner who doesn't feel obligated to help other people. And so not only should we not blame them for wanting to play an aloof badass, we should expect it from pretty much every player. So I had to pivot in the moment in order to hook them into the adventure. I asked one of them, "What are you in town looking for?" And she said she was looking for cultists to her goddess. And so I kind of leaned on that and said she recognized the telltale clues of a black magic ritual. You know, someone being stolen, it's night, it's a full moon, or no, it's a new moon actually, because I forgot which kind of goddess you worship. So it would be new moon, not a full moon. That was just my way of trying to get her to take the bait. But that also means that I maybe also misled her about how this could be connected to her goddess. She didn't seem to take it that way, so I guess I dodged the bullet there. But you know what would have been better? Talking to her in advance. And speaking of things that are really good to do in advance, but that some of us are kind of bad about doing, I find that it's really helpful to take all the information rattling around in my head and put it down on paper or in a text file in some way before the game. But so often I fail to do that. And what would really help is if I had some incentive to do it. Like if I put it down onto some sort of text document or website or something, I don't know, then maybe I could find some way to make it look cool and inviting and send it to my players and they could see it and go, "Ooh, this is really interesting." I actually did that with this game. I took the information that I had and I put it into some sort of online resource of some kind, and I sent it to my players and they said, "Oh, that's awesome." And that online resource, by the way, was the sponsor of today's video, World Anvil. World Anvil is a fantastic online toolkit that gives you all the tools you need to share your world's details with your players. For example, let's imagine one of your player characters is a veteran who fought against a rebellion. If you're a good game master, unlike some people, you could ask your player for whatever details he has in mind based on his backstory, and then you could use World Anvil to send him an article all about that war. You could use World Anvil's wonderful Chronicles feature to create a timeline of whatever battles you want to flesh out because you think they're going to be important for the player to know about. And you can create articles all about the agents of the rebellion that are still at large. And thanks to World Anvil's robust tools, you could include those enemy stat blocks in the articles themselves. So all you need to do is pull up the page and then you can roll attacks and damage right there through the website. Visit worldanvil.com/supergeekmike and use the promo code code SUPERGEEK at checkout to save 51% off of any annual membership. Once again, that is worldanvil.com/SuperGeekMike and use the promo code SUPERGEEK. Thank you so much to World Anvil for sponsoring this video. As I was thinking about how badly this tavern opening went, I thought back to all the tavern intros I've played in or run, and I've realized how much I've been spoiled by great players, or just solid scenarios. In that first game I ever played, when the player said, "Oh, we're starting in a tavern," we were only in that tavern for like a few seconds, because the first thing that happened was someone from the town council walked in and asked for volunteers to go fight a troll. And we all volunteered. I don't remember why, maybe there was a good gold reward, maybe this is just because we all knew this was the adventure, probably a little bit of both. But once we all stood up to the volunteer, we were off to the races. The D&D adventure had begun. We were meeting with this town council woman and not in the tavern anymore. The point is, our DM didn't make us all sit in the tavern and expect us to start spontaneously doing something interesting, like I did in my most recent game. And then 12 years later, when I was briefly the DM of our actual play show, one of the best parts of my campaign before it was put out of its misery by COVID was the opening scene where the players met up in a tavern. But that was partially because none of those player characters were completely new to meeting each of the others. They'd already met in pairs in some short preludes. And we opened the game with the bard finishing a story and sitting down next to the monk, who was someone he already knew for probably at least a day or two, thanks to that prelude. And these players were also specifically primed to, be entertaining. They were coming to sit at the table to do bits, because we were doing a show. So even though we were just opening in a tavern, they still knew how to find their own fun and do something interesting and entertaining. Like having the bard convince the monk to try alcohol for the first time by telling him it's just a special kind of water.
My God, it's amazing, this water.
Oh man, this is... Have you ever had water like this before?
Well, it makes the pain go away, if that's what you're asking.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely does.
Blocks away a lot of memories that I don't want to think about.
Wow. Phineas, looks back and, nudges Quatra. Hey, do you see this?
No, I feel like I'm going blind.
Oh my God.
Additionally, when the other adventurers entered the tavern, the bard rushed to introduce himself to them, because he wanted to meet interesting people and find more traveling companions. So we had a player actively making introductions and trying to put a group together. And even though the fighter wanted to be anonymous, the player didn't stonewall the bard. And once again, that was at least in part because this was a show and the players were performing for an audience. Now, by my count, I've opened 4 other campaigns in a tavern. Technically 5, but 2 of them were running the same module for different groups, so those both had the same opening scenes, so we'll count these as one campaign for our purposes today. So 4 campaigns that opened in a tavern. And for 2 of them, the players weren't just randomly in a tavern when the game started, they'd each received an invitation to meet here and get hired for a job. And so they sat down to this table with a bunch of other new people, the other adventurers. And this still doesn't give them a ton to react to, but at the very least the players don't feel like they're on the hook to fill the rest of the session with bits or being entertaining. Both as players and as characters, they know they're just waiting for someone else to show up and give them their mission. Again, this wasn't perfect, but at the very least, it's better than what I just did. But honestly, the other 2 tavern-centric intros I've done were absolutely my favorites. Because with both of them, the players were chilling in the tavern, and then something came to the tavern causing trouble. In a pandemic game I ran, the players were in the tavern on the 2nd floor of a building, above a bakery, and they heard a smashing sound from downstairs. A few players went to go check on it, but most especially the paladin, and it turns out the bakery was being attacked by redcaps. Now once again, I had great players here. Our paladin was especially someone who was more than willing to throw himself into danger if it made the story more interesting, so he took the bait for that plot hook in the way a lot of the players in my latest game did not. But this was still a scenario that didn't depend on altruism in the same way, because rather than a victim entering the building, monsters were entering the building. And it's easier to get players to engage with that first fight when their lives are actually on the line. But my best tavern opening, and honestly probably the best campaign opening I've ever run, came when I ran Hoard of the Dragon Queen. This is the campaign I've run twice. Both of them were later derailed for very different reasons, but the way I ran the opening scene has always worked. Now, the way the adventure is written in the book, the intro is terrible. The players literally walk over a hill and see a dragon attacking a town and some cultists or kobolds or whatever they can see from a distance, but they see other invading forces, and the book expects the players to rush down into the town and defend the people, which is just not at all realistic. I mean, even if some level 1 characters want to rush into a town being besieged by a dragon, they're either close enough to get to the town, in which case, why couldn't they hear the commotion from over the hill, or they're far enough away that they can't hear the dragon attack, in which case, why would they rush into town when they likely can't get there fast enough to do anything to help? Now that might seem like a silly reason to not like the opening, but it's something that bothers me because it literally doesn't make sense to me. And if I don't think it makes sense, and I don't believe in the intro, I can't really run it for my players well enough to make them believe in it. So instead, I open Hoard of the Dragon Queen with all the players in a tavern, all having come to town for whatever particular goals they have, and then there's an explosion and the tavern collapses on top of them. And then they have to pull themselves and the other survivors out of the rubble, escape into the streets, and discover the explosion came from a building being hit by a blue dragon's breath weapon attack. And then the players are dropped into the adventure as written, where they fight cultists and kobolds in the streets and run to the keep in town in order to try to take shelter. Now, yes, in theory, we're going to run into the same problem that I had in my most recent game. The players aren't going to have much to interact with in the tavern. But that's okay, because literally all I'm trying to do is set the scene in an interesting way before I blow it up. Then, once the building collapses, the options ahead of them are very clear. And that eliminates all those problems I faced when I opened my latest campaign in a tavern. Now look, ultimately what we're talking about is not the end of the world. Even though the start to my latest campaign was kind of rough, my players still had fun and they all wanted to come back and play again as soon as possible. That actual play show with a solid intro scene wound up leading to a meandering campaign with really rough pacing, especially for a podcast. Both times I've run Horde of the Dragon Queen, the campaign died an ignominious death. One time with a total party kill, and the other time because I had way too many players. A few of those players made choices that sent the campaign in a direction it couldn't recover from. I ran the game with some absolutely terrible pacing on my part, and of course that adventure itself is extremely flawed. The point is, the opening of your game isn't necessarily an indication of the quality of the rest of the campaign. If you get off to a bad start, you can absolutely still recover from it. That being said, it would be nice to start your game off well, wouldn't it? To be honest, I've been worried about the whole idea of starting in a tavern for a while now. I've had a video concept in my notes that just read, "Most movies don't open in taverns," because I wanted to dig into what makes a campaign opening dramatic and examine whether a tavern opening could do the same thing. We've covered some of those thoughts in this video. I actually think the quintessential tavern scene in movies is probably from the Mos Eisley Cantina in Star Wars. And that scene is interesting and engaging in all the ways a great D&D intro can be, but a tavern scene sometimes struggles to accomplish. But the reason that scene is so strong is because, well, first of all, fantastic visuals. That's tougher to pull off in your own games unless you happen to be close friends with Ralph McQuarrie. But also, that scene works well because those players come into it with a goal. That scene isn't just about two characters hanging out in a tavern and having to keep themselves entertained. They're looking for a pilot while the Empire is also looking for them. I suppose another good example of a tavern scene is probably Casablanca, and I think that actually might be a movie that opens in a tavern, but I haven't seen it since high school, which was around 20 years ago. Cool, let's move on. Listen, if you think you can make the tavern intro either quick or dramatic, that's fantastic. And one way to handle that is to talk to everyone in advance and figure out their goals and incorporate those objectives into the first scene of the campaign, so when they're in the tavern, the story itself has already started. But there are also other ways to start your campaign where you can hit them with an inciting incident right away, and that will make their goals very clear right away. We saw that with the example of the exploding tavern, but I think the strongest example of this was in my favorite game session I've ever been a part of, when my friend Jay opened his campaign with all of us waking up side by side in a mass grave and having to dig our way out. We actually wound up falling through a patch of earth beneath us into an underground fighting pit, literally, where some gnolls were watching some cockatrices fight. Now we had to fight the cockatrices and escape from a dungeon full of gnolls. Still one of the best campaign intros I've ever been a part of. And part of why it worked so well is because it put a clear goal in front of us. Get out now. And then we had a moment to collect ourselves. We discovered we were all missing a huge gap of time. We all had matching tattoos of a black feather, and one of us had a broken compass around our necks. Oh, and the NPCs in the first town recognized us. It turns out that we'd already blown through town and we were real assholes to everyone. And we all clearly knew each other even though we had no memory of meeting each other. But these NPCs were also able to set that aside so we could help them investigate the recent explosion that had completely destroyed another town in the valley. And so that campaign was structured around a few mysteries. The personal mysteries of what happened to us and the larger mystery of what was happening in the valley itself. God, that campaign was so rad. But there are also other ways to open your game. For example, when I run my Curse of Strahd games, where the players are all teenagers from our world, I introduce each character in their mundane lives, kind of like the opening of Fantasy High. But I make sure these scenes help to establish why everybody is going to be willing to meet up at the spooky house on Hickman Road for a spooky birthday party. And once they're there, I can start ramping up the horror. And in that case, I really try to make sure each scene serves a purpose. Plus, the players know their characters are going to wind up in the lost land of Barovia, so they can also enjoy that dramatic irony. But we'll talk another day about how I run my Curse of Strahd campaign. I'm not going to give away all my secrets today. We will definitely talk about other ways to start our campaigns in the future on this channel. In fact, as a reminder, I'm doing a video series this year where I go through a bunch of different lessons for structuring your campaigns, using lessons from movies and TV shows, and some of those are going to demonstrate different ways we can open our campaigns. In fact, I should have a video coming out hopefully later this week, all about a totally different approach to running the first sessions of our games, so that should be a ton of fun.
So you're doing some bonus videos this week?
Yeah, if everything goes according to plan, there should be a couple of extra bonus videos coming out this week.
That's great! Because at the beginning of the month, you mentioned all these bonus videos you were going to make, but you haven't really been keeping up with that upload schedule.
Yeah, I mean, I had a bunch of extra videos in the pipeline, but then all these wildfires hit the areas around where we live.
Oh.
Yeah, I mean, we've been safe so far, and thankfully the rain finally hit, and so it seems like these fires are getting under control, but they did have to turn our power off 3 times, usually for multiple days at a time, and that really cut down on how much time I could spend editing and completely eliminated all the chances I had to actually do any filming.
Right.
Plus, even though we were safe, the fires got really close a few times, and so we just didn't know if we'd have to evacuate. And being in that constant state of anxiety was really not fun.
Sure, makes sense.
But I also have some videos that I promised to a sponsor, and so even though I'm sure they would understand if I had to push them back because of, recent events, I do still need that money, especially since the videos I made this month haven't really performed that well, and I am still the only person in the house with a job.
Right. Well, is there anything we can do to help?
Well, yes, actually, if everyone watched and could share these videos with a friend, that would really help a lot. And also, if you could subscribe to the channel and ring the bell, you can watch my new videos as soon as they come out. That also really helps. And of course, if you want to help support the channel financially, that would be amazing. No obligation, of course. I know people are all going through their own stuff, especially with the new administration's terrible economic policies on the horizon, but if you're able to support financially, you can join my Patreon or become a YouTube member. You can also join my Discord or sign up for my newsletter so you can catch all my updates without being dependent on social media platforms, which seem to be increasingly under the control of a bunch of right-wing freaks.
I could do without the politics.
Well, tough cookies. We're still going to talk about politics kind of a lot on this channel, actually. I mean, if you don't want to be associated with my political content, I would completely understand. You could just leave when I start talking about politics, which I did just start talking about politics, so you could just leave now. Should have tried that weeks ago. But I would also love to hear from you in the comments. Have you ever opened your games in a tavern? How did it go? Did you run into the same problems that I've described, or did you have any other problems I haven't addressed? Let me know in the comments below. Click here to watch my video about the movies and TV shows and comics and books and games that inspire my D&D adventures. That video was a lot of fun, and I would love for you to watch it. Until next time, play fair and have fun.